And at a certain point, I thought, what am I going to do with my career? If I'm going to lessen my gigs, I still have a wealth of knowledge about this career path. I've done a whole bunch of things. And at the same time, I see people, they're recreating their careers. They're doing different things that are totally cool. And I found it so inspiring and exciting. And I am really attracted to just knowing more about it.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath. So glad to have you here. I really appreciate it. Visit our site at contrabassconversations.com for all the details about what's going on here. And I'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, feedback@contrabassconversations.com. Let me know any ideas you have for the show. How are you enjoying it? What would you like to see in the upcoming weeks, months, years? That'd be great. Today, I'm so thrilled to be talking with Tracy Friedlander, who's the host of Crushing Classical, which is a new podcast about creating a career you love as a classical musician in today's world. Sounds like an important topic, right? I was fortunate to be asked to be one of her first guests, and you can hear me on episode 5. I've got that linked up in the show notes. So, Tracy's also writing regularly for her Crushing Classical Facebook page, and she's in the process of writing a book as well. So Tracy and I actually used to play together in the Civic Orchestra of Chicago nearly 20 years ago, and it's been so much fun reconnecting with her through this podcasting world. So we talk about her motivation for launching this podcast and her vision for the show going forward. She's had some wonderful guests on so far, and I'm so excited to see what she does next. So be sure to subscribe to her show on iTunes and follow her Facebook page as well. She's got, like I said, great writing that she's doing as well. There are links to both of those in the show notes. I'd also like to thank D'Addario Strings for sponsoring the podcast and let you know a little bit about their Zyx strings, which are multi-filament synthetic core strings. It gives them a rich, colorful, gut-like tone. They've got great attack, they've got great sustain, they've got great bow response for arco playing also. So they're really good hybrid string for different styles of music. They're designed, engineered, and crafted at the D'Addario String Factory in New York. I've been using them for the last couple months, been really digging them, really cool strings. And D'Addario has put together a string giveaway just for Contrabass Conversations listeners. So if you go to contrabassconversations.com/strings, fill out the survey, and you'll get entered in the drawing. So thank you very much, D'Addario. And thank you to Bass Capos for providing hosting for Contrabass Conversations. Bass Capos is run by Rob Anzalotti, who was on the podcast recently. He's got a very cool company, and these capos, they're a great choice for any bass player looking to use or implement a double bass extension. So they're easy to install, easy to adjust. They're cheaper and they're more reliable than hand-built latches. They're lighter and they're quicker to operate also. So learn more at basscapos.com, and thank you, Rob, for providing the hosting. Okay, here we go with our interview with Tracy Friedlander of Crushing Classical. I am so thrilled to have Tracy Friedlander on Contrabass Conversations. I think we're still under 10 non-bass players on the podcast. So you're one of the rarefied few, and it's just such a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And we first met, boy, was that like 15 years ago, 16 years ago? We played in the Civic Orchestra of Chicago, right?
Yeah. It was. I love Civic. It was such a great experience.
Yeah. And maybe let folks know just a little bit about your musical background, and you're a horn player, and just take us on a quick journey from, starting the horn till now.
Okay. So, I started in band just like most people, and I grew up in the Illinois area, and Chicago Symphony was always the end-all be-all ensemble that I wanted to hear and see and study with those players. And so after undergrad, I made my way back to Chicago, and I did Civic, and I did a master's degree at Roosevelt, and I studied with Dale Clevenger, and started my freelancing career in Chicago. And I was lucky enough to play with the Chicago Symphony because of Civic and Dale and everything. It was just a thrill. And then but I always wanted to keep looking for a job. I always thought that, and the best thing possible would be for me to have a position in an orchestra. So I ended up auditioning a few auditions right out of grad school, and I got a Virginia Symphony position in Norfolk, Virginia. And when I auditioned, I had no idea even where that was. I knew it was some small orchestra. My place in that time was just auditions are there. I need to go and take them. So I did that and I won. And I think a big part of that was just because I didn't know what I was getting into. It was like, let's just go see what happens. And I was prepared, but at the same time, I was still, I didn't have all those preconceived notions of, oh my God, if I get this job in the Boston Symphony or Chicago or whatever, it wasn't that big. So it felt doable to me.
Sure.
And then I got the job. And once I was there, coming out of grad school, the job didn't pay a whole lot of money. And I was leaving my people in Chicago and my freelancing, and my whole family lived there. And I ended up not really thriving in Virginia. The pay scale was pretty low, and I was missing home, and it didn't work out for me. So I wanted to go back and freelance again in Chicago. So I left Virginia, went back, and got back into the freelancing scene somewhat, and gradually, anytime you leave and you come back, people for like 6 months are like, hey, I thought you left. Like, no, I've been back. I've been back for a year. Don't you remember? No, I don't remember that. So it takes a while to get back into it. And then I ended up taking a year, or I thought it was going to be a year, and it felt like a year, but it was 3 months. I went to Beijing, and if I felt like I was on another planet, but I went and played guest principal horn in Beijing for a few months, and that was quite an experience. And I had a lot of time to practice. So I knew that I wanted to come back and take more auditions. So after my stint in Beijing, I came home and took a few auditions, and one of those was for the North Carolina Symphony, and it was for fourth horn. And I played the whole audition. I got to the finals, and there were 3 people left, and they chose someone else who was someone who was playing 1-year positions here. And so I was ready to go back into my room and pack up my horn and get moving and come back to Chicago. And the personnel manager came in and said, Tracy, we really need an assistant horn, and that job isn't a contracted position in our orchestra. We just need someone who's willing to be the first call sub, essentially, and we can offer you, 250 services a year, and it pays this much, and there are no benefits, but we want you for the whole season, essentially. And we want to keep giving you that work every season as long as you want it, because it's not turning into a paid salary position anytime soon. So if you move here, you're pretty much guaranteed, full-time work at a per service rate.
Sure.
So I pondered on it because I'm a Chicago girl and I just love the city life, but at the same time, I was still struggling with how much work do I have and how much do I have to supplement with teaching 40 students a week and waiting tables and all this stuff. So I decided to make the move, and I moved here, and I've been here for about 12 years.
12 years. Okay. Okay, great. So what have you, and I'm sure that your career's evolved over those 12 years, but what are some of the things you're doing now to supplement that income?
Well, at first, I just was playing all the time, and it's a really busy orchestra. It travels a lot. They travel all over the state of North Carolina. It's considered a state orchestra. So they spend a lot of time on the road playing education shows and different various cities around. So it was a really, really busy job. Since I came, they don't do as much traveling as they used to, but it was very, very busy. And I ended up meeting my husband, who I'm married to now. And we, over the years, after I got married to him and then had a baby, like I realized I don't think I want to be traveling all this time. I have a kid now, and it's, having two parents on the road gone with someone staying with the kid wasn't how I wanted to have our family life going. So I lessened the amount of work I was doing with the Symphony over the last 6 years, and I supplemented with teaching and other gigs, because there are other gigs around here. There's an opera orchestra, and there's a few other ensembles that play, that are reasonably close, or there's musicals or nutcrackers or whatever that comes through. And so I would do that. And then I am adjunct faculty at North Carolina State University, although they don't have a major program. They only have a music minor program, and typically there aren't a whole lot of music minors. So for 2 years in a row, I had one student, and then she decided not to continue her minors. So then I had 0 students. So it's an engineering school. And so there are actually a lot of engineering students who play horn for fun, and they play in the community orchestra there. So the conductor there brings me in to work with their horn section and stuff. So it's interesting how the career sort of got puzzled together. I thought Chicago was the only place to be, as in my little narrow-minded way of looking at, Chicago Symphony's the best. Chicago's the only place to be. And when I left, I realized, wow, I live in a place which is a growing city, and since I've moved here, it's so much better, like as far as more to do, more restaurants and everything. It's growing, but I also get to live 4 minutes away from work. There's free parking, and, there's things about it that make it far less stressful than living in a big city. And I never thought I would say, oh my God, I like living somewhere else better than Chicago. And that never would have occurred to me ever. But I took the chance, and now I'm here, and I'm like, I love to visit the city and go check it out again. Like I recently was invited back to sub with the Chicago Symphony a few times at the end of the last season, and it was so much fun. It was such a thrill. And I was also like, wow, I forgot how stressful it is to ride the train for an hour and a half and worry that is this train going to stop,
Yes.
For no reason, or whatever.
The randomly stops train. There's nothing gets the blood pressure going than looking at and as a bass player, I didn't do that often, but I would. And I remember getting caught on the L and just like trying to like shake my body to get the train moving, Oh, okay. That's funny.
I know, you go to worst case scenario, like, how long are we going to sit here? Is it possible that we could sit here for 30 minutes? What's going to happen? Oh, then the light goes off. And then you're like, now what's happening? Is the power out? Like, it's just the worst. But so I would be a nervous wreck and leaving like 2 hours early and getting to the gig an hour and a half early so I can warm up and be there. And I just don't remember being that stressed out when I subbed with them before. I think I was so much more used to the city life that I was like, this is what I have to do. But when I'm visiting and not living there, I'm so neurotic. Am I going to make it on time? And I'm 2 hours early. I'd rather be 2 hours early than, God forbid, 20 minutes early,
Right. Oh, I know. Well, that feeling of, and I've spent the last few decades in urban areas. So I've gotten used to leaving 2 hours early, 3 hours early, get there early, sit in the car, find ways to waste my time. But I just went down and was playing in Memphis, in the Iris Orchestra in Memphis. And there's a place where the hall's 4 minutes away, and you can leave, and it'll only take you 4 minutes. Nothing's going to stop. And it's like all this free time materializes. Anytime I would try to like push it a little bit close for a gig in Chicago, there'd be that anxiety of like,
totally.
Checking the traffic. Red on the map,
And it's red always on the map there.
Yes. Uh-huh.
But yeah, we would just be eating dinner at 7:00, 7:15 for an 8:00 show, warming up briefly before we can have the luxury of warming up here and then jumping in the car at 7:35, getting there at 7:40, and you still have 20 minutes to get situated. You're already warmed up. You're already wearing your clothes because you don't need to worry about getting them dirty in the subway. So you can just wear your clothes out the door, and there's no parking to pay for, and it's not stressful. It's really kind of nice.
Well, those are things that really, I mean, that's a huge quality of life issue, what you're describing. And that's something that I think people who are raised in either environment might not realize what it's like in the other environment. I mean, for me, the amount of hours, because I had a full-time teaching job, listeners of the podcast will know this, I've babbled about this a lot, but I had such a crappy commute that it would, on the way home, it would frequently take me 2 hours just to get home, right? Just to get home from work, sometimes up to 3. And sometimes I'd have an hour and a half in the morning. So you're talking, that's almost like the length of a workday, just sitting in that stinking car. And then you throw in gigs into the mix and you're looking at 5 hours, 6 hours in the car, and stressful in the north, with the snow and the just the nightmare commuting scenarios.
Yeah, well, and I used to do that too. When I taught in Chicago, my students were in Naperville, and some of them were in Arlington Heights, and I would just have to leave an hour and a half, 2 hours before the first lesson, and that was in the days before unlimited cell phone minutes, and I got into a lot of trouble with that, like overage charges galore, because I would call people and not think twice that, I was going to have to pay for that.
Oh, I remember I remember those overage. Boy, that's we're dating ourselves with the
I know,
like that. But I remember driving down to Memphis to play this. Once a month I'd drive to Memphis and talking with. I had my 4 friends I would call on the way to Memphis, and I knew that I'd lose the signal, for these 30 miles. So I called before, call after. You're taking me back. Good memories and frustrating memories at the same time. Well, so I gotta ask, switching gears slightly. So you just started a podcast. You just launched, and the podcast, Crushing Classical. It's awesome. Just listen to the first episode. Love it. So I've got lots of questions. I love talking to people who do a podcast. It's like a rare opportunity for me. So first of all, what inspired you to do a podcast?
Well, what was happening in my life is that as I was realizing that I didn't want to keep doing gigs in exchange for missing time out with my daughter, I wasn't able to be with her, obviously, when I was at work. And my position was assistant horn. So when I would go there, it's an important job. I'm not going to say it's not important. As a principal horn, you don't want to be without an assistant. But as an assistant, your job is to support the principal. It's not your own part. Yeah. And it's a supporting role. So you don't get at least for me, there might be people out there who just love assistant playing and they get really fulfilled by it. But I found myself sitting in concerts and saying, okay, I'm going to give 40% of what I'm making to my babysitter while I sit over here and play 40% of the notes, And I didn't want to have my life like that anymore. So I gradually started to take gigs only when I was playing in the section. I had the luxury being in a smaller town where there's not a whole lot of horn players, and the fact that I had my position, if you want to call it, where I had been the runner up, and I was able to say, I really only want to play when you need someone in the section and I don't want to do assistant work anymore. If I did that in a big city, they'd be like, okay, that's great. We won't call you ever again. So I had the luxury of not having that problem because there aren't a whole lot of horn players here. So that's what I did. And I started to be home with my daughter more, which was great. And at a certain point, I thought, what am I going to do with my career? If I'm going to lessen my gigs, I still have a wealth of knowledge about this career path. I've done a whole bunch of things. And at the same time, I see people, because of social media and the internet, they're recreating their careers. They're doing different things that are totally cool. And I found it so inspiring and exciting. And I am really attracted to just knowing more about it. And so I thought, if I start a podcast, I can start interviewing these people, and it's inspiring to me to talk to them and to get it out into the world and show people that possibly they can do the same thing. And it doesn't have to look like exactly what it looks like for the person who I'm interviewing, but if it's somehow inspiring and that conversation leads them somewhere where they can say, maybe I would like to do that for myself. Maybe I would like to create a career for myself in a different way, then I would be thrilled if I could provide that through my podcast. And just having started it, I can't even begin, as a podcaster, how fun it is to have these conversations and talk to people and get to the bottom of how and why they're doing what they're doing and what it's all about. It's really neat. So
yeah, no, but what I love is, for me, it's the sort of conversation, like what the conversation we're having right now. This is the sort of conversation I'd want to have anyway. And having the podcast is just this added bonus where you can take it and you can put it out to the world and they can benefit from that. But what I like to say is, the people I interview on my show, it's the sort of thing that I'd be talking about over a coffee or a beer with them anyway. And just this modern technology allows us to put it out. And it's like, for me, it's like the greatest self-education project ever, because it forces you to reach out and interact with people. And I love the guest. So you put up the episode with Giacomo, who's a fantastic guest, and you were talking about Peter Seymour, who's been on my podcast. So this is a great lineup of guests. What are you looking for in a guest for your podcast? What makes you think, I want to talk to that person?
I look for someone who is doing something different than waiting for their phone to ring and just do that job that's offered to them. Someone who decided that they were going to do something different that they created, that they were in charge of. That's what's interesting to me. And it doesn't mean that you have to completely turn your back to freelancing or auditioning or anything necessarily. What interests me is that when someone takes responsibility and control over the outcome of their life and say, this is a project that really fuels me and gives me, and I have tons of passion over it. That's someone I want to talk to.
Yeah. Cool. No, that's great. I've thought a lot about what makes someone appear on my radar. And I'm not really sure what it is. A lot of it is like, I'm talking about beer on this episode a lot, but it's like drinking a beer at night and scrolling through my Facebook feed. And all of a sudden I see, why haven't I talked to so-and-so or such and such? But it's definitely not there's a lot of just sort of inspiration and happenstance for me finding people.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, so now you're a podcaster. You're in this world. Welcome. So what's in your the brief time you've been doing it? What's the most unexpected thing that you've discovered, either like on the tech side or the interview side? Just what surprised you about this process?
I'll tell you, on the tech side of things, it was both easier than I thought it would be and harder. On the easier side, when I decided to do this, I said, I'm launching a podcast. It's coming out October 10th. And I have no idea how to do that. The only thing I know how to do is email people and ask them if they'll let me interview them. I didn't even know how I was going to record it or anything. So I started Googling and researching how I was going to do that. And I found this really cool website called Zencaster, where you can record straight from the call, essentially. And I thought, is it really that easy? Like I send a link to the person, they press the link, and we're immediately connected on a call. And then all I have to do is press this button, and there it is. Like I couldn't believe that it was actually someone had invented something to make it that easy on me. I didn't. I was shocked by that. And then luckily, because of the articles that you wrote for Artist Hacker or Arts Hacker,
Yeah,
is
Arts
that what it
Hacker.
was?
Yeah.
You were very clear in what to do next in one of the articles, and that I didn't even know what a podcast hosting website was. And you outlined it and you said, well, I use Libsyn, and so that's where I'm going to talk about it. I'm like, if Jason uses it, I'm using it. So I went to it, and it was pretty self-explanatory as far as like clicking and then it's happening. But then when it came down to launching, I thought I could just say, okay, here it is. Go, press send. And then I like dug around a little. I was like, that's a little too easy. I don't know if that's really going to show up in iTunes tomorrow. And I started Googling around, and then it said, I found this article, and at the very bottom it said, just a word of warning, iTunes takes 2 to 3 days after you submit your podcast to put it in. And I was like, what? I just said it. I just told everyone that it was coming out tomorrow, and here it is 1 a.m. and it's not going to be on iTunes. Luckily, you can still listen to it through the Libsyn link, and I was still able to launch it anyway. And it just took a few more days for the one on iTunes to show up. But I just thought it was funny because here I am having this experience like, oh, it's not as hard as I thought it would be. And then suddenly I got this feeling like maybe that's not, maybe there is something I'm missing here on that particular issue. I was right. I was like, oh, I forgot to read into that. But so that was my experience with the tech side. And with the interview side, I didn't realize how nervous I would get to interview people and listen to my own voice on a recording. I'm used to hearing my horn playing on a recording, right. And having a conversation doesn't make me nervous for some reason, but suddenly I'm an interviewer, and look at all these people who do it great, Look at Jason's podcast, look at Oprah, for God's sakes, and here I am trying to do it, I felt a little out of my league. And then I thought, forget it. I'm really hard on myself as a musician, and all musicians are. I mean, we all have that in common, right? That our job is to look for what's wrong so we can fix it and try to make it really perfect. And in this realm of things, I think it's time to start letting that go. You and I talked about that, the beta mode idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Tracy was kind enough to interview me on her podcast, and I'll make sure to link up to that for folks so you can check it out.
When it comes out, I'll be sure to broadcast it and share it to you and everything. It was a great interview.
It was fun to do. The tech side of things for folks listening to this, it's kind of like anything on the web. It's nothing that hard, but it's like a lot of little steps. And then you start to describe and you realize, oh, that's kind of complex. Like, oh, it's not a big deal. You just do this, and then you do this, and you do this. And oh, don't really forget about this, and do this. And then you have a list of 35 things. You realize, oh, that's fairly complicated. But so it's like, I love that. Yeah, it's both like actually pretty easy, and then it can be like bafflingly weirdly hard.
There were little things like, oh, you don't have enough storage to put that art on. And then what I realized was I uploaded first of all, I had my art was too big. My podcast art was too big. So I had to go back to the designer and ask her to give me a smaller image. And also I uploaded that image like 6 times to be the thumbnail. So that took up the whole space, and I didn't realize it. So once I erased that, and I still haven't figured out the thumbnail. I found people's pictures, like I found your picture online, and I took it from Google and I tried to upload it as a thumbnail, and it looked like it went on there, but then on iTunes it's not showing up. So there's little things like that don't really matter, but at the same time I kind of want that thumbnail, so I don't know.
Right. Yeah. What Tracy's describing. Yeah, that's like one of the many like tech minutia. I could give you some, I could show you what to do. But that's one of those things, like I couldn't get it to show up either when I was restarting. And then the interviewing thing, it's so hard. It's to hear your own voice when you're starting to do something like this. And I think after a while, like I've just become desensitized to the sound of my own voice and my verbal tics. And I've gotten slightly better at certain things that I still stammer a lot, and debate about editing out or not, or just leaving it. And it depends on how much coffee I've had. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't.
Well, I'll tell you what I enjoy about your voice. You have a great voice for radio, and you have the beloved Chicago accent, I have to say.
I have this weird accent where I have now, after like 20 some years, I have the Chicago accent, but I also have this weird Minnesota, Dakota accent kind of buried in there too. So it's like I do the wash in Chicago. You know, it's like kind of that like Polish hard accent, but also like this sort of Swedish Norwegian thing kind of mixed in there too. So it's a I wouldn't be a good bank robber because people would be able to identify. Well, so who are some people you've got coming up on the show?
Okay, so I'm interviewing Peter tomorrow, so I'm really excited about that. And he's been on your show. I love everything he's got going on with Project Trio. I can't wait to talk to him about that. And then another person that I have coming up and one of the indicators I like to use for someone I choose is someone who's made a career switch, like they were doing something and then they switched and did something else. And so everyone that I've interviewed so far has had that qualification. So one of the next people coming out, actually should be the next one that's being released, is this clarinet player that was a colleague of mine here and a friend. His name is Chris Grimes. And he started his own record label and management company in New York City. And his whole idea is about collaboration and playing new music and friends getting together to do cool projects and recording and making records that are self-released and things like that. So, and he's quite a character. So, and it's funny because he was freelancing with me here, and then he married someone who lived in Manhattan and moved there and started his new career over there. So it's fascinating to see how different his life is from living in North Carolina. He used to be on the faculty at Eastern North Carolina University. So that's a really fun one. And I actually interviewed my brother-in-law because he has his own music school in Birmingham, Alabama. He created a string program there. And so he owns the school and he has people who come in and teach Suzuki lessons there. And he teaches Suzuki. And he's a cellist. He's married to a cellist who's in the Alabama Symphony. And when he moved there, he started as a freelancer and he was freelancing with them. And then he got a position in the Atlanta Opera. But he also really loved teaching and he was really interested in Suzuki, and he decided to stop all that and completely focus on Suzuki. And he also really loves playing other genres on the cello. So he started taking improvising lessons. And so he was working on that and he joined a band. And so he had that switch too, where he said, I'm not doing that stuff anymore. I'm going to do this stuff and I'm taking over what's happening. And so that's why I interview him. It's kind of funny to interview my brother-in-law, because I've known him for 10 years and I'm like asking him all this stuff that I already know. And then he's referring to our family in the context of the, and I'm like, okay, I don't think my listeners know who, my husband's name or whatever yet, but whatever. It was really fun. It was a really fun interview. I'm excited for that one to come out too.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it can be hard with people that you really know well. Some of the ones I do that I think, this is just going to knock this out of the park. It's almost like we're too familiar. We know each other too well that and it just doesn't necessarily go the way I expect. And then others, all of a sudden, it'll be like solid gold, and I never would have expected that was the way it was gonna go. Well, that's cool. I love that premise of finding someone who's like really made a right turn or a left turn. That's exciting. Because I think we learn so much from That's so much more. The world is shifting to one in which we all move around a lot more than we used to. And that's happening in a lot of careers. Music's one of those things that still has those conservative streaks where, well, I got my job in 1967 and I'm doing the same job. And that's just so unlikely to happen to someone graduating in 2016, 2017. So, congratulations on doing that. I'd love to know maybe just a couple of, okay, so you had the idea for the podcast, so you must have been listening to some podcasts. What are maybe 3-4 podcasts you like? They don't have to be music podcasts, but what are some that kind of inspired you to dig into this?
You know what's funny is that I really don't listen to that many podcasts, but I know, but the one or two that I did listen to, actually, you know what? It's funny. I take that back because sometimes I was listening to a podcast and actually didn't really realize that it was a podcast, if that makes sense. Sure. I wasn't going to iTunes to hear it, but it was a natural health podcast. Okay. And it was an interview that would come out every single Sunday. And it was cool because it was only available for on Sunday from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. for the people who don't pay for the membership of the website. And so I had an alarm on my phone. You have to listen to this podcast between 9 and 9. This is something I'm going to want to hear. And I learned some incredible information from that podcast. So that one's a really great one. It's a health one, but it's called Natural Health 365. So it's kind of a cool, he interviews all kinds of doctors, and it's just something that I'm interested in on a totally unrelated to music realm. And then one of them is James Altucher's podcast. Mm-hmm. I originally discovered him when I found an article of his where he's boldly saying, don't go to college. Yeah. Don't send your kids to college, and I resonated with that. We homeschool our daughter, and I resonated with that because I was not a school lover. Mm-hmm. And as much as school has its place, and in music school, you kind of need it if you're going to learn from a teacher that, teachers are typically in schools and you have to go there. But, I felt like I wanted more from my education, and I find that I learn so much more when it comes from that I'm truly interested in what that is that I'm learning. Mm-hmm. And since I've graduated, I've become educated and remember so many more things because I'm not trying to learn it so that I can regurgitate it for a test. Yeah. So I know all this stuff about health or random things that I've listened to and watched because I'm just so fascinated by it that I can't stop taking in the information. And James's blog post about that, James Altucher's, was essentially like saying, instead of sending your kid to school and your kid doesn't know what they want to be when they grow up, give them $20,000 to start a business. Even if it fails, they're going to learn way more than they ever would have learned if they didn't have the business at all and it failed. Even if it fails, they're going to learn so much invaluable information. And it's so out of the box to say that kind of stuff. And of course, what I love about it is he says this and people freak out, and you can read all the comments. They're like, how dare you say that? College is so important. And he loves that kind of stuff. Yeah. And just his interview style, he constantly interrupts people, and it's just funny because he just says, I know I am interrupting you again, but I just have to know what's that all about and what's this. And I think I just like his style, so I listen to him too. Oh, I love that you listen to him. And folks, I'll link up to, if you haven't read any of James Altucher's stuff, check it out. Choose Yourself is a great book. Choose Yourself is a great book. Yeah, and his podcast is great. Get on his email list. It's totally people. There's a New York Times article I was reading about him, and they were calling him the anti-Tony Robbins because he's kind of like within that world, but he's this like nerdy, nervous guy. It's riddled with insecurities. Yeah, but just such a great thinker. And I'll link up. I'm saying this out loud to remember to link up to this too as I edit this. But I had a great interview with Arnold Schnitzer, this luthier out in New York, and he digs into this whole concept of college. And we talk about Mike Rowe and dirty jobs and like the jobs that are actually out there. And
what the economic future looks like, and it's food for thought, and this is coming from, like, I got my undergrad, I got my master's degree, a very traditional educational background, right? And I think that we should really be thinking about those things a little more critically, especially given the economic future we're seeing and the costs associated. That if you're plunking down $250,000 to go to Northwestern or Juilliard or NEC,
that's how much it is now.
It is, and you look at, and then you think, what am I going to do? And you look at the trends and the prospects. That's why I think it's so great that you're doing this and you're presenting people with other options. What have people done? There needs to be more of that out there. So hats off to you for doing that. It's super exciting. And
thank you.
Yeah, maybe can you let people know if they're going to if they're listening to this podcast, they probably know what a podcast is, but maybe just let people know where they can find your show.
Yeah, so it's Crushing Classical. The tagline is redefining a thriving classical music career. It's on iTunes. It's on Google Play. And it was on another podcast catcher that you told me about, and I put it on there. I can't remember what it's called now.
And you've got a nice Facebook page, like you're posting on Facebook and writing on
Crushing
Facebook.
Classical Facebook page, and I'm on there. I'm bringing up. I want to start a conversation about exactly what we're talking about. That it's possible to create your own career, and maybe we need to reassess how we get ourselves educated for this particular career. And in the future, I'm planning on offering solutions to that as we move forward. It's really a big goal of mine to make it a tangible thing for people, and that is going to be out there on my Crushing Classical page on Facebook. I really would love it if people would go there and engage in the conversation with me about this stuff and tell me what's going on in their world, because I've been doing it the traditional way for a really long time, but I graduated in 2000 with my master's degree, and that's already 16 years ago. And so I get it. I know what the world looks like now, because having been here and seeing, how often there's auditions, how many people show up to those, what actually happens at those auditions. I have a husband who sits on the committee a lot. He tells me what happens behind the scenes. There's a lot going on the other side, as well as what you're bringing to the table when you go and audition. And it's hard because there's so many unknowns and different factors that are in play. And it's your life at stake, and it's your income at stake, and it's your ability to support yourself and pay back your student loans at stake. And it's like there's no power there if you're not taking a look at your career in a way that's more of a business owner. Even if you do freelance and play gigs and try out for orchestras, you still have to, I think, in today's day and age, be more of a self-employed person.
Yeah. And just not put all your eggs in that one basket. And it's funny because a lot of us that went into music, it's like that's what our parents told us to do, and then we ignore that advice. Don't put all your eggs in the music basket. And then here we are saying the same thing to people. But it doesn't mean don't become an amazing player, don't become the absolute best player, right. but just be aware of the realities that we all face, and that there are many satisfying ways to quote unquote make it in this music world. So, and what you're doing, highlighting the different ways that people are doing that outside of the ways we all are familiar with, like the traditional orchestra job and the academic jobs. It's great. It's great. So keep up the good work.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I'm welcoming everyone who's listening here to check out Crushing Classical on Facebook.
Well, thanks again, Tracy, and check out the links in the show notes to her Facebook page, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, and I'm just super excited to see what you do next, Tracy. So that's going to do it for another episode of Contrabass Conversations. Thank you so much as we near the end of 2016. Thank you for following along. What a year it's been. What a decade it's been. Lots of new things in store. So glad to have you on this journey with me. If you'd like to support the show in any way, shape, or form, all that information is at contrabassconversations.com/support. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.